Hi. So for this week's assignments, we had to create a concept map, which is shown right here. Our concept maps had to be based off the two readings we had to do, and then this week's readings was on behavioral learning. We had two different theories. It was classical conditioning and operant conditioning. And then before I go into fuller details, I want to explain how I did my concept map. So you can see at the top we have the main subject. This was behavioral learning, and then on one side I have classical conditioning, and then the other side I have operant conditioning. Also, part of this week's assignment was to incorporate the red words into our concept map, or so that's what I understood from the directions. So as you'll see here, I incorporated the red words into my concept map. And then also, I'm going to go fast because this is my third time and I keep going over. So hopefully I make sense and I can finish all the key points. And then also, I'm sorry if my dog begins to bark. I'm home alone all weekend and he's right here, so I'm sorry. Okay, so I'll start here with behavioral learning, classical conditioning. So classical conditioning was invented by Ivan Pavlov in 1927, and he believed that learning was occurred through association, and he is most known for the dogs, the Pavlov dogs. So I'm going to first read my concept map, and then I'll go into fuller detail after I read. So we have here classical conditioning as a theory that believes that when two stimulus are linked together, a new learned response occur. And then I have my first red word, which was below the level of conscious awareness, which I understood as occurring, or below the level of conscious awareness is the response that occurs when you are in an involuntary state. And then we have automatic or reflexive response, which is an involuntary response. And then you have your unconditional stimulus, which is automatically triggered. It's a trigger response. And then you have your neutral stimulus, which is a stimulus that is produced with no response. And then you have your unconditioned response, which is unlearned response, conditional response, which is an automatic response that is established, trained from the neutral stimulus. And then you have your conditional stimulus, which is learned response to the previous neutral stimulus. So I'm going to go back to the pictures that were shown on the classical conditioning, and it was the picture of the dogs. And I'm going to use it to give my examples and make a little bit more sense of the classical conditional theory. So Pavlov dogs, before learning, they associated, or the meat was their unconditional stimulus, which is right over here, unconditional stimulus. And then the salivation that came when they saw the meat was the unconditional response, which is right over here. And then when he brought up the bell was just a neutral. It had, it gave no response. However, while training, he brought out the bell, and like stated, the bell now becomes a conditional stimulus, which is right over here. And then the bell with the meat. So I'm assuming he rang the bell, and then by side he had the meat, which became the unconditional stimulus, which is right over here. And then from this, the drooling came about or occurred, which is the UCR, which is the unconditional response, which is right over here. And then after I imagine that was done multiple times, then the dogs eventually learned to associate the ring of the bell to the meat. So then the testing you have became that, or the testing, while testing, the bell is a conditional stimulus, which is right here. And then after ringing the bell, he got the drilling from the dogs, which is the conditional response, which is right over here. And then, so yeah, that was the testing. So in other words, from Pavlov ringing the bell, the dogs associated the ringing of the bell with the ringing of the meat. So whenever the bell was ring, the dogs began to drool. They did not see any meat, but they knew that whenever the bell was ring, the meat was to be followed. And then that's kind of what classical conditioning is all about, is learning through association. The dogs learned that by touching the ringing of the bell, the meat the meat will come out. So yes. And then I'm going to go over to the operant conditioning, which is on this side. And I'm first going to do the same thing I did with the other one. So I'm going to just kind of read through all of my boxes, and then I'll go back to it. So operant conditioning was a theory that was created by B.F. Skinner in 1938, and he believed that learning occurs through rewards and punishment. And then also individuals make an association between a particular behavior and consequences. And then I believe the first red word on the operant conditioning reading was Skinner boxes. So the Skinner boxes were the chambers that Skinner used to place his mouse, which he was using for his experiment. And then that's how he collected information for his I'm sorry, for his let me go back. Skinner boxes. So he used the boxes to record findings or observations for his experiment. And then that's how I imagine, came about his theory by the use of the Skinner boxes. So then I'm going to start with positive and negative reinforcement. But first, I want to define reinforcement, which reinforcement is to maintain or increase a desired behavior. So for positive, I put a favorable stimulus is added, and then you have negative, and unfavorable stimulus is removed. And then you have over here on the other side your positive and negative punishment. And I'll define punishment. Punishment is used to reduce or to eliminate a behavior. So for positive, punishment is by adding of an aversive stimulus in order to eliminate the unwanted behavior. And then your negative punishment occurs when you removed an appetitive stimulus in order to eliminate an unwanted behavior. And then I'll define appetitive over here, which is a stimulus that is pleasant or rewarding. And then aversive is a stimulus that is unrewarding or is unwanted. And then you have here the variable interval schedule, which defines that's when the stimulus is given after when a stimulus is given after a variable amount of time. Fixed interval schedule is when a stimulus occurs. No, fixed interval schedule, the stimulus that is given after a fixed amount of time, regardless of the number of responses. And then fixed ratio schedule is a stimulus that is delivered after a set number of responses. And then your variable ratio schedule is a number or responses required to receive a stimulus varies. So now I'm going to go back to this positive and negative reinforcement. The reading did mention that a lot of us tend to confuse the positive and negative reinforcement and punishment because we see positive and negative. We think, oh, this one's positive, this one's negative. But positive and negative in this form, it only refers to the addition, which is positive, or the removal, which is negative, of a stimulus. So that's kind of how positive and negative are used in operant conditioning. So we'll go with over here, positive reinforcement. And an example that I'm going to give is when a parent rewards a child for completing her chores with candy. So candy becomes the positive reinforcement. And then you have your negative reinforcement on the other side, which here it's an example that I came across is a teacher requires her students to give her pretend money for not completing their homework. So eventually the kids will start to do their homework because they don't want to give fake money to the teacher, and then that's how negative reinforcement, what negative reinforcement means. But also in the reading, it does clarify that positive reinforcement and negative punishment are usually connected and are usually together, and they use the appetitive stimulus, which is they involved a pleasant stimulus, and then your positive punishment right over here and your negative reinforcement are usually together, and they involved the aversive stimulus, which is an unwanted stimulus. And then I'm gonna go back. I'm running out of time, but hopefully you finish. I'm gonna go back to an example that was given to us while reading. So I'll start with this example. So the child is misbehaving. So then the parent revokes the television. That is a negative punishment. But the child continues to misbehave. So then the parent begins to yell. So that is an aversive stimulus. And then the child continues with the disruptive behavior. So then the parent negotiates with the child by offering to reduce chores. So then that is an example of a negative reinforcement. And I'm running out of time, so that's all that I have. And I hope I made sense and that I covered all the subjects and checked off all the boxes. Thank you for your time, and see you on Tuesday.